Chapter 10. Tag finally had Roxy walking along the edge with him again, or at least recognizing that they still had something there. He had never in his life been a good strategist. His frequent confessions of love for Roxy had come in impulsive moments when his longing for her had pushed him over an edge, and always in song because he couldn't manage to get it out any other way. He'd never stopped to think about how or when might be a better time, only that he had to let her know. Even his decision to use the concert in Little River to give it one last shot had been a spur-of-the-moment thing, with no planning as to how best to present his case. Just told his band he was going to play the next song by himself. But that moment when he stepped up close to her, when he hadn't been able to resist another second, when he'd almost given in and scooped her into his arms, that was the moment he saw her flail forward to the edge again instead of peering at him from her safe perch. Something in that moment held him back and allowed him to see that there might be something to having a plan. He strummed aimlessly on his ukulele as they hiked the trail, letting Roxy stay in her world and stew while he worked through a plan in his mind. Every so often he'd sing soft lyrics just to watch her shoulders relax for a moment and see her fingers flutter against her leg. Then she'd clench her fingers together and quicken her pace for a few minutes like she could outrun the way he made her feel. She thought she was in love with Nash Roberts, and given her stubborn nature and the lengths she'd gone to avoid Tag up until this morning, he couldn't use a brute force attack on her heart and expect to come away the winner. He didn't like that getting Roxy back meant someone else losing her. He could understand how much that would hurt, but he couldn't live without her, so he had to sneak up on her, kind of like the way he had back at the car. Show her little by little how much he cared for her, how they were meant to be together, until before she knew it, she would take his hand and leap over the edge with him. Like any time he spent in Roxy's presence, words pounded against him faster and faster. When he worried they'd burst out against his new plan not to come at Roxy guns blazing, or that worse, he'd lose them, he found a rock at the side of the trail and stopped. He would sit and pull his notebook out of his bag to rest on his knee. When he started strumming, for the first time Roxy turned, maybe because the sound hadn't come from directly behind her. He sang a few words and scribbled them out, along with notes about which chords to use so he could remember. "What about—" Roxy's voice startled him as he realized she'd come to stand in front of him while he sang and wrote things down. But then she frowned when he brought his head up, and she took a step away. "Never mind." She shook her head, retreating further until she stood in the middle of the trail, hands on the straps of her backpack, waiting for him to finish. She had been about to make a suggestion, like she had in the old days, the ones that Tag had always lapped up and hoped that meant she was starting to understand his language. He didn't push her. No more brute force attacks. He sang a little bit more, wishing she would have told him, wondering what she'd wanted to say before she stopped herself, and finally, when he felt like he had enough down to at least capture the soul of the song, he closed the notebook and stood up. "Sorry," he apologized as he packed his things away. She shrugged. "You came to Little River to write. I know this is where you get some of your best ideas." "You're where I get some of my best ideas," he corrected, holding her gaze for a few seconds before trudging on. It killed him not to peek back to see how she'd taken his words. Having never planned an attempt like this before, he didn't have any idea if he was doing it right. But those words felt right, and when the words felt right, he trusted that.